I should also congratulate you all, I have to say, on what, as far as I can see at the moment, is the first conference I've ever attended, possibly the first in history, which for most of the day has run ahead of schedule. But I think there's a reason for that. All of us speaking have been given 20 minutes each to talk about the idiocy and lunacy of Durban. And the truth is, you don't need 20 minutes. Any sane person could do it in 2. I don't need a podium to do it. I could do it lying down. So could any of you. That's why this is so ahead of schedule. But look, this is a little, it's a long way to come just to say that. So I should pad it out a bit, if you'll bear with me. But look, just to reprise, I mean, 10 years ago, in 2001, the first Durban conference, Fidel Castro was introduced as the leader of, quote, the most democratic country in the world. Now, in any normal circumstance, the UN should have said, Kofi Annan should have stepped forward after wiping the tears from his eyes and after everyone had got up off the floor and said, that's all, folks. That's enough comedy for 1 year. That should have been enough. But it wasn't. It wasn't. That wasn't the end of Durban. We've now had Durban 2, Durban 3, Durban 1. Following Fidel Castro, we had Yasser Arafat speaking. I picked up the New York Times this morning. Well, I didn't really pick it up. My hotel gave it to me. It's the only reason I've got it. But I was struck by the front page story on the Declaration tomorrow. In the second column on the front page of the New York Times, after introducing Mr. Abbas, for decades, the defiant, charismatic, and unpredictable Yasser Arafat. I have to say, most contenders for the Republican nomination would kill to get coverage like that from the New York Times. But Mr. Arafat, the dead terrorist, still gets it all these years on. There was nothing defiant, charismatic, and unpredictable about him. He was a terrorist. That was it. He spent his life and career terrorizing. Anyhow, clearly the NYT's gone the way of the UN. Look, in my home country today, there's a huge row you may not have heard of today. It hasn't made all of the international papers. Lord West, who was formerly the first Sea Lord under the last Labour government, has got into one of those lovely political turmoils people get into because he was on a panel in London this morning and he said, this former Labour minister, he said, quote, we are a permanent member of the United Nations, we Britain, Security Council, and I think that gives us certain clout and certain ability. These mean we're not a second-tier power. We're not bloody Denmark or Belgium. Now, if you're a politician, that's the sort of thing it's best not to say. It's true, even if you're a retired politician. And, of course, immediately demands for apology, huge concocted political rows, Conservatives demanding retraction, and the Labour Party has now formally apologised. But the truth is that Lord West, who I'm now going to be the first person to defend, may have said something impolitic, but it isn't wrong. It's not a lie. It's flattering, if anything. I'm not sure that Belgium makes second-tier status now, but the point is that the politic thing of pretending nations all the same all enjoy first-tier status is exactly the lie that the UN plays every single day. Every single day, the UN maintains this fiction. It maintains the fiction that all states and all governments are essentially equal. And when the Syrian government's foreign representative says something, it's as interesting and worthy of note as, say, when the British foreign secretary says something. But it isn't. The democracies of the world, the free countries of the world, and the dictatorships of this world are not moral equivalents, they're not moral equals. Governments who repress and murder their own people and seek to do it to others aren't equals to the democratic and free nations. But look, I mean, we've been through this all before. In 1975, as you all know, the UN passed the Zionism is Racism resolution. proposed by Idi Amin, the wife-eater, literally, as you know. It wasn't a reading mistake on my part. A typo in my speech. And the next day there was a reception thrown for him by Kurt Waldheim, the Nazi. Now, only at the UN could you have a group of people accusing Israel of being Nazi, and the accuser is a Nazi. It's a symptom of a sick institution. Fortunately, then, as now, there were people who were speaking out against it. America had an ambassador par excellence in the late, great Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who said that the resolution, among other things, granted, quote, symbolic amnesty and more to the murderers of the 6 million European Jews. For this and many other reasons which he gave, the lie had repercussions, he warned. These were prophetic words. He said, the terrible lie that's been told here today will have terrible consequences. People will begin to say, indeed they have already begun to say, that the UN is a place where lies are told. Moynihan explained that the motion which had been passed threatened not only the security and legitimacy of the State of Israel, but the security and standing of all nations of the UN. The motion harmed the fight against racism by stripping the term of any meaning and potentially damaging the security of all nations. For if racism could be so drained of meaning today, then so tomorrow could national self-determination or indeed national honor. Finally, the resolution damaged the idea and the language of human rights. By assaulting a word, assaulting a language, assaulting the truth and telling lies, the UN has done something which the United States, as Moynihan said, does not acknowledge and will not abide by. The same day, Israel's ambassador, Chaim Herzog, declared, I stand here not as a supplicant, for the issue is neither Israel nor Zionism. The issue is the continued existence of this organization, which has been dragged to its lowest point of discredit by a coalition of despots and racists. You yourselves bear the responsibility, for you stand before history. We, the Jewish people, will not forget. Now, that was 1975. I was born in 1979, as it happens. Between 1979 and 2001, indeed, between 1975 and 2001, a whole new generation of people were born, educated to some degree, and grew up. But throughout that whole time, the UN didn't grow up. The UN didn't change at all. And we saw the final apotheosis in that in the setting up of this farce of Durban. A farce, by the way, which also we have in the UN paid for. 25% of the cost of the first Durban conference was paid by the Americans. It's not surprising when you have largesse like that people will decide to take advantage of you. You know, the Organization of African Unity demanded at Durban 1 that reparations for the Hutu slaughter of the Tutsis in Rwanda should be paid, and it should be paid by the Americans, and not by the people who'd done any of the slaying. Of course not. Why would they have any responsibility for their actions? Why not go off to America to demand the money? Now, the UK and other countries sadly stayed on for another round of this farce, and in the UK's case, only recently withdrew from the latest one. But the idea among these nations was, the ones who wanted to stay in, was that it was better generally to be at the table. It was just much better to be in the negotiations, in the room, at the table, and to negotiate. Well, what is there to negotiate over? What is your negotiation with the numerous countries in the OIC whose representatives declared the Holocaust never happened? Do you want to barter them down? Do you want to barter them down from 6 million Jews to 3? It's grotesque, utterly grotesque, to even think of negotiating with parties like this. What about the threat to Israel, the elimination of the Zionist state? What is there to negotiate over in that? The elimination of some of the Jews? A moderate position? It's a farce. It's a farce to even turn up to something like this. It's a moral inversion and a historical inversion. The slavery comes up each time at this circus. And each time, the countries that were first to abolish slavery get attacked by the countries which are currently practicing slavery. Slavery was abolished in the British Isles in 1772 and across the empire in 1833. And at that time, it was fiercely opposed, the abolition of slavery, by Arab and West African traders who were doing a great deal in it. And Britain, though, like America, finds itself the target of people who would pin it on them even now. But of course, it's also an inversion of language. If the language that's used at Durban can be used, then words stop meaning anything. It's exactly as Daniel Patrick Moynihan said. There's no use eventually for an important and necessary word to use like racism if it's being used in the kind of context it gets used at the UN. We have to call this what it is. This is nothing to do with racism. It's nothing to do with anti-racism. It's nothing to do with the ordinary language and debate of politics. Durban provides now what it has always provided, which is an opportunity for perverted despots to attack the free nations of the world and deflect opinion worldwide from their own actions. That's it. And if there's any doubt about that, you know, Zimbabwe, which has taken such a leading role in this august Durban institution. At Durban 1, the Zimbabwean government called on Britain and the US to, quote, apologize unreservedly for their crimes against humanity. In the last 20 years, just the last 20 years, life expectancy for the average male in Zimbabwe has fallen by a third, just in the last 20 decades under Mugabe's rule, by a third. The current life expectancy of somebody in Zimbabwe, ruled by Mugabe, is 39 years. It's grotesque. By any estimation, it's grotesque. The government which attacks my government, your government in America, has the worst case of hyperinflation in modern times. The currency, as you know, is utterly worthless. Untold numbers of Zimbabweans have been murdered by the regime. Untold tens of thousands more have died from the famine that regime has allowed to come about. And it's not for nothing that the Ugandan-born Archbishop of York, John Sentamu, has called Mugabe the worst kind of racist dictator. In 2003, at the state funeral of one of his cabinet ministers, Mugabe said, quote, I am still the Hitler of the time. This Hitler had only one objective, justice for his own people, sovereignty for his people, recognition of the independence of his people, and their right to their resources. He said, if that is Hitler, then let me be a Hitler tenfold, 10 times. That is what we stand for. And of course, Ahmadinejad. Last night in this city, about 100 undergraduate and graduate students, along with professors, attended an invitation-only dinner and a question-and-answer session with the despot of Tehran. It was moderated by an Iranian UN official. Students spoke to CNN afterwards and expressed excitement about the event. At the end, the guests were given hand-painted plates from Iran and books about theology. The mood, according to CNN, was jovial and positive. People who were there said that some questions were asked about nuclear issues. Good not to spoil a good dinner. Some questions were asked about the economy and Israel, but the tone remained positive. Ahmadinejad even joked and laughed at times. And, of course, at the dinner, Ahmadinejad claimed that Iran is, quote, the only nation that can offer a new model for life to the world. Neither words nor actions clearly mean anything if somebody can get away with saying that. A regime which hangs homosexuals, beats and kills women, keeps 50% of its population in total permanent subservience, and 100% in a kind of modern slavery. For the leader of that regime to come to New York and claim that he leads a model for the world is preposterous. And it goes on, but we get used to it. Because the problem that Durban has led to is that we become bored almost by this kind of language. He normalizes it. It's so tedious to keep on having to bang on about it. But, you know, this Durban thing is supported by human rights violator after human rights violator. And that's all they have in common, the supporters of Durban. All they have in common is an interest in perverting real human rights and leading their own people into slavery. Now, it's not surprising that this anti-Israeli and indeed entirely anti-Western initiative should go in for diversionary tactics. The Libyan representative in Geneva said the intention behind the 10th anniversary event was to include drawing attention to the alleged escalation of Islamophobia. The Libyan representative cited the Danish cartoons and reverend pastor threatening to burn the Quran in Florida. You can bet at the end of their august deliberations that it will be on exactly that matter that these luminaries have spent most of their time. If somebody says that 6 million Jews weren't killed or says they want to kill another 6 million Jews, it's a detail. And to point it out must be Islamophobic. But the real problem is some wacky Florida pastor who couldn't fit his congregation into he could fit his congregation around a dining room table until he was made some kind of world celebrity. And this crazy pastor is, in the eyes of the attendees to Durban, the sort of thing you should really start to worry about. It's preposterous, of course it is. Look, Ahmadinejad said a few minutes ago at the UN that he thought the September 11th attacks were mysterious and they were a pretext for US-led war against Afghanistan and Iraq. He said the United States killed al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden instead of assigning a fact-finding team to investigate hidden elements involved in September the 11th. When Ahmadinejad speaks, when he denies the Holocaust, when he calls for the new one, as I say, it's so boring, it's become normal, and people stop going on about it. I've got his speech here. Somebody gave it to me earlier, not one of his representatives. And it's very striking, by the way, even the opening of his speech, in the name of God, compassionate, merciful, and so on. And it includes, "Oh God, hasten the arrival of Imam al-Mahdi and grant him good health," and so on. The usual throat clearing. But again, look out tomorrow for which papers or which broadcasters even mention that the dictator in Tehran started his speech with a prayer calling for the end of times. Because I'd bet that if George W. Bush had started a speech at the UN with a call for Armageddon, or a prayer for Armageddon, the Guardian newspaper would take an interest. It might even make the front page of the New York Times. But if an Islamist fascist like Ahmadinejad does it, so boring, hardly worth a news in brief, don't you know? The Durban process is a joke. It comes from an institution, the UN, that has become a joke by continuing to support and sponsor and propel this appalling idea. No organization can be serious if it has Iran on its Commission on the Status of Women, has Saudi Arabia, China, and Cuba on its Human Rights Council, has China on its Committee on Information, has Sudan on the Executive Board of the Children's Fund, and has Iran on the UN Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice. It's a joke. But it's a bad joke and a very serious joke. What is happening in this city at the moment matters, because it is stripping people in countries around the world who need to use the terminology of human rights and need to use the terminology of racism. It is stripping that right from them, along with so much more. It perverts history, it perverts language, it perverts politics. I hope that after today, the Durban process can be declared dead. A failed process, it lies in the dust, it has passed on to meet its totalitarian makers, it is no more, and if anyone outside this room has any doubts about it, then the fact is they never looked into it in the first place. Thank you.